Welcome to Investment 360. My co-host, Kevin Lings from Stanlibs, and joining us from Cape Town now is Richard Gosnell from Taquanta. Thank you so much for your time. We're looking at the NGI Quants Core Fund this evening, Richard, and perhaps an appropriate starting point is to look at why retail investors out there are potentially not equipped to choose fund managers. That is a discussion that we started offline, and I thought we could throw forward to it for the audience this evening.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. I think one of the investments, the whole investment field is fraught with many dangers. One can start with, how difficult it is to pick stocks, no matter how good one analysis is. And eventually one comes back to the point of saying, even if one doesn't pick stocks oneself, one eventually needs to pick a manager to pick those stocks for you. And the investment research has shown that that is actually quite challenging. I think in a similar vein to the fact that the stocks themselves are difficult to pick, is also in many ways just difficult to pick the managers. Some research that I've seen, let's say over a 10-year period done by Morningstar in the United States, shows that the investors in a particular sector will in fact underperform the managers that they are investing in, which by margins, depending on which sector, by let's say 3% might be a number. It ranges from 2%, 1% to even very high numbers in the teens. And the only possible reason why that can happen is that the investors are choosing the wrong funds and they are overweighting the funds that are more likely to underperform in a particular sector. And the analysis broadly shows that the funds that look hot, look interesting, look exciting are the funds that tend to attract the retail flows, and to a significant detriment of the retail investors. So for example, if you underperform by 3% per annum the universe that you were trying to invest in over a 10-year period, that is a fairly substantial 30% underperformance of the sector, of the universe from which you were picking your managers.
Richard, I think it's quite important, can you just explain how your fund would differ from a typical multi-manager equity fund? What is the clear distinction in the approach?
Yes, thanks, Kevin. The approach is, first of all, it is a single manager fund. In other words, the fund that we manage on behalf of Nedgroup Investments is managed simply by ourselves. What we do as a starting point is look at the average manager holding. In other words, we are very cognizant that we are competing in the general equity space, attempting to outperform the average general equity manager. And effectively, we do that by looking at broadly what they are holding, knowing what you start with. Then we have an approach, and it is based on quantitative asset management, but it's an approach that tries to find the way the market works and find a way of, in general, increasing the probability of outperforming. So it's been successful. It's a top quartile fund over periods anywhere from 2 years to 7 years. So it has been very successful so far. We've been running this strategy for in the region of 4 years.
So do you believe, Richard,
process.
Do you believe that quantitative analysis, quantitative fund management should ultimately replace active fund managers? It's a tough question, but let me put that to you.
It's a tough question. It's a very interesting question. I believe it won't, and I believe it has significant merits. I believe some judgmental managers, as some quantitative managers, are able to outperform. Not every quantitative strategy will outperform. So it's really a case of, it's a different way of looking at the market. It has its own merits. One of its merits, for example, is that it is significantly cheaper to implement than a judgmental or process. But each of them have its merits, and given the human spirit, which really looks at investing in experts, in trusting experts, I would very much doubt that quantitative asset management will ever replace the normal fundamental approach, which I also believe in a sense is one of its advantages. If you are doing something that is maybe slightly contrarian or different or unique, you have a greater possibility of outperforming than if you are with the crowd. So in fact, in many ways, I don't want it to replace the traditional approach to asset management.
Richard, how are you able in your fund then to mimic what the other managers are doing? Because in essence, that's what you're doing, right? Your fund represents a summation of what other managers are doing in the market. How are you able to do that?
Yes, okay, so Kevin, let's just start with that. The first part of that is, that's really just our starting point. The aim is not so much to only mimic what other fund managers are doing. We simply need to know what they are doing as a starting point, just like we could use the same process, and we do use the same process against the SWIX index or the all-share index. We are just have a benchmark. We know that that's our job, is to outperform them. We need to know what they're doing.
So that's ultimately actually creating, if I can just interject there, in terms of ascertaining what the other fund managers are doing, that is tantamount to your creating your benchmark. Am I understanding correctly?
Yes, and that is simply the starting point. In other words, that is basically saying that we need, and holdings are published, so it's really a case of just aggregating what the average manager is holding. What we then need to do is find a way of outperforming it. And it's a fairly complex process. It is what a quantitative asset management is about, detecting patterns in the market, testing whether they really are likely to persist into the future. And I don't believe that this is necessarily the place to go into those details, but effectively we're not just mimicking, we're actually using that as a starting point, and then very definitely going out to outperform the average manager. And the results are we've outperformed 75% of the managers in that universe.
Since inception, so certainly your performance does speak volumes there. Richard, thank you so much. We're out of time. Richard Gosnell from Taquanta. We're taking a short break, and after this we speak to Anil Jagmohan. He's an investment analyst at Nedgroup Investments. You're watching Investment 360.
Only one international business magazine can bring you the world's most coveted champagnes, Africa's 100 richest, the 400 best big companies, the continent's most powerful women, and Africa's top-earning CEOs. Forbes Africa, arriving October 2011.